Welcome to our weekly series of Facebook Live updates dedicated to fair housing. I'm Tiara Pitts, the Director of Fair Housing for South Carolina Realtors and the staff liaison to our statewide Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council. I'm also an attorney and member on our SCR legal team with Austin Smallwood and Byron King. Throughout the month of April, in celebration of Fair Housing Month, we're bringing you weekly updates in place of our regular Facebook Live updates from our CEO, Nick Kermitis. Every Monday in April at 11:30, we're going to provide you different experts in the fair housing space, provide you with valuable resources, and get you educated and up to speed on all things fair housing. So make sure you mark your calendars and tune in every week at 11:30, and also subscribe to our Facebook page and our YouTube channel where these will be reposted, as well as in our weekly newsletter. So our first guest for this series is Alexia Smokler. She is the Director of Fair Housing Policy and Programs at the National Association of Realtors, otherwise known as NAR. Alexia represents NAR's position on fair housing to federal agencies, Congress, and state associations just like ours. Alexia also led the development of Fair Haven, a fair housing stimulation and bias override, overcoming barriers to fair housing. Before joining NAR, Alexia worked on fair housing enforcement at HUD. Alexia is admitted to practice law in Maryland and holds a law degree from the University of California, Berkeley School of Law. Thank you so much for being here with us today and taking time out of your busy schedule to come talk to South Carolina Realtors. How are you doing?
It is always a pleasure to join you, Tiara. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So, of course, I was doing my research on all of the different initiatives you've been a part of. And this month, while we're currently filming this is in February, we recorded a podcast episode in honor of Black History Month. And I got to learn firsthand about some of our Black realtors and the things that they had to go through, from, fighting in the market to suing the MLS to being able to even be realtor members themselves. And this was in the 1980s, 1970s. So that really provided like real life insight to me and gave me a perspective and many of our members and viewers. And I saw that you wrote an article called Repairs of the Breach, which won several awards, and it kind of talked to some of those issues. So could you explain to our viewers what that article was about?
Absolutely. These stories, this history, it's so important because it answers the question why. Why do we have fair housing? Why do we need these rules? Why do they still matter today? And the beginning of the answer to that question why is to look back at history. And what we see is not only blocked opportunities like the ones you described for your members, but in terms of home ownership, blocked opportunities to become homeowners and property owners, but also people who had gained home ownership and property ownership and had that property taken away. Understanding that history helps us see why today we have a home ownership gap between Black and white Americans at 30 points. That's actually bigger than it was 10 years ago, and essentially the same as it was 60 years ago when the Fair Housing Act passed. When we understand the history, it can help us understand the present and what we can do to close these gaps. So just a little bit more about the stories and repairs of the breach, and I hope your members can check it out on Realtor Magazine's website. It told 3 different stories. One of them was from South Carolina, and it went all the way back to the time after the Civil War, when some land was given to the newly freed, formerly enslaved people, 400,000 acres about from Charleston down to Florida in 40-acre parcels. And then after the war, that land was taken away. And so the newly freed former slaves never got the 40 acres and a mule that, some folks have heard about and that the federal government promised to them. They never got that. But despite that failure, by 1910, there was a big movement among formerly enslaved folks to own land. And so by 1910, about 200,000 Black farmers owned an estimated 20 million acres of land nationwide, mostly in the South. A century later, 90% of that land has been lost. There's a lot of reasons why. Discriminatory denials of assistance by the Farm Bureau and other government entities that supported white farmers but withheld that aid from Black farmers, real estate swindles, violence that forced people off the land. But one mechanism for getting people's land away from them was exploiting the tangled title that results when people inherit land as what's called heirs property. That is, where land is passed down through generations without a will, and you might have a dozen or 100 heirs. There's no clear title. It's very easy for someone to buy one sliver of the land, force a partition sale, and have a sheriff's auction, and the land is gone. It's been estimated that the value of that lost land was $350 billion, and that the wealth generating activity that land could have provided folks by, securing loans for a business or sending kids to college is estimated to be about $1 trillion. So what can we do? Well, one thing that South Carolina has already done is to adopt this law called the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act, which gives these heirs some due process protections in case someone is trying to get their land away from them. The other two stories in repairs of the breach had to do with Evanston, Illinois, where we saw a history that reflects what happens in a lot of cities across America. First, there was racial zoning. Then there was practices by the real estate industry that basically forced Black people to live in one small slice of the community bordered by the railroad tracks and the sewage canal. And as the population grew, the land did not grow. And so it became severely overcrowded. The housing there was substandard. People who could have afforded to buy homes were not permitted to buy homes in other parts of the city. When the veterans came back from World War II, they were forced back into that area. And so Evanston acknowledged its practices prevented people from owning land and from gaining wealth. And so Evanston created a reparative program that was specifically aimed at the Black residents of Evanston who could show that they or their ancestor lived there at the time. There are grants available for home ownership and community development. Now, the other story in the article is from Asheville, North Carolina, and that story is about urban renewal. Again, in something that happened across the country, where cities in the 1950s and 60s, in the name of slum clearance, destroyed successful Black communities and Black businesses, did not provide adequate recompense to the residents. A lot of the folks in Asheville were moved into public housing. And now, decades later, that land is worth millions of dollars. So in Asheville, they haven't quite figured out what they're going to do to repair the harm, but they're looking at taking the city-owned land that was acquired through urban renewal and returning that land back to the Black community. So in each of these stories, the theme is looking at our past, acknowledging the harm, and then looking for ways to repair the harm.
Thank you for sharing that, and congratulations on all the awards that you won with that powerful article. So I know you said that one of the steps is acknowledgement. What about people who don't want to acknowledge and they're just like, that happened 80 years ago, 50 years ago, like, let's just move forward. Like, now as a Black person, you're allowed to buy a home. You can, go to school or do different things. So some people may feel like they don't want to hear about this anymore and just kind of just forget about it and try to move forward. Like, how can that work to go against us, learning and fixing these issues?
Well, there's two words that sum it up pretty well, and those words are generational wealth. Some people's grandparents were permitted to accumulate wealth and pass that down through their families, and other people's grandparents were not. And I don't think anybody can argue that what happened to your grandparents has nothing to do with your life today. If your grandparents prospered, that sets you up to prosper. If your grandparents were forbidden from prospering or were actually prospering and had that land taken away, that sets you on a different trajectory. And it shows if you look at the data. So we just released our latest snapshot of race and home buying, and you'll see that white people are twice as likely as Black people to rely on the sale of an existing home as to fund their down payment, right? So that's that story of the past meeting the present. And Black people are 3 times as likely to have to tap their 401k or their pension to fund their down payment. So again, these are people who are working hard. These are people who are saving money, but they can't draw on that generational wealth. They're starting the race from behind. And so when we look at the 3 biggest barriers that Black folks face and other people of color, it's down payment, it's debt to income ratio, and it's credit score in qualifying for a mortgage. And all 3 of those factors are strongly influenced by this inability to accumulate intergenerational wealth. And until we address that, we can't close the racial homeownership gap that we see.
Thank you. And what is some things NAR is doing to address those 3 specific issues?
Well, we are advocating for down payment assistance. We're advocating for federal down payment assistance, but in your state and in your local level, private entities offer down payment assistance. So we should advocate for down payment assistance programs. We should learn about what down payment assistance programs are available and what lenders work with them so that we can better serve those clients. In terms of credit score, we're really excited that we're beginning to update these credit scoring models that were created decades ago that assumed that everyone was a W-2 wage earner, that didn't look at people's biggest monthly expense, the rent. We don't look at that when we decide if someone is going to pay their mortgage on time. So the FHFA, which is the agency here in Washington that oversees Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae that back most of the conventional mortgages in this country, have recently updated their credit scoring model to include positive rental payments and utility payments. And that's going to get a lot more people into home ownership range. So we're going to keep advocating for these things at the federal level, but you can advocate at the state and local level as well.
Yes, thank you. We're definitely, our DEI Council is going to be looking into some advocacy and some things that we can be advocating for in terms of, like you said, down payment assistance or programs such as the using the rent, because it only makes sense if someone is, because a lot of the times when we're talking about people who don't have that generational wealth, it may be generational of renters and that may be holding them back. But if that could be used to get them to that next step of home ownership, I could see how that could be very useful, especially since, you have to pay that anyway. It's, in most cases. So using something that they're already doing, that they're doing for an extended period of time to help actually build some obtainable wealth through home ownership is going to be a good idea. And I noticed that a couple of years ago when I was living in an apartment that was starting to come out. So I think that would definitely help people. So I know that you were over a couple of education programs at NAR, one of those being the Fair Haven program. So for anyone, I know a lot of people are familiar with Fair Haven, but if they aren't, what is Fair Haven and why did NAR feel it was necessary to develop this?
We created Fair Haven not long after the Newsday investigation was published in 2019, and I recommend to all your members, if you have not seen the Hidden Camera documentary, you need to watch it. It shows you what not to do if you want to stay on the right side of the law. But what we saw, and this was a newspaper in Long Island that had sent testers out with hidden cameras, and what we saw, among many other problematic things, was that agents were actually referencing their fair housing training. They were talking about what they weren't supposed to do. They named it, like steering. They knew what it was, and then they did it anyway. So we could see that something wasn't connecting, that we needed a new kind of training, a training that would resonate more with people to teach not only the substance and the substance of the law and the rules that you have to follow, but also why we need to follow these laws and why we need to embrace these laws. And so that's how we came up with Fairhaven. It's not your traditional lecture and quiz. There's no lists of laws and provisions to memorize. We wanted to give members a chance to practice fair housing principles in scenarios that feel real. And so you go into this fictional town. It's kind of like a video game where you're trying to sell homes, and in each scenario, which are based on real fair housing cases, you will encounter different kinds of discrimination, and you will make decisions that will affect the outcome. Then we also flip the script. So in some of these scenarios, you're actually in the position of a home buyer who is facing discrimination, and you have to go through a home buying process in their shoes. And we follow those up with video testimonials of real people who have experienced housing discrimination. And we've had members tell us it had them crying, it had them angry, and we wanted that emotional reaction because we really wanted this training to resonate.
How often, if at all, does the training get updated?
Well, we are updating it right now because NAR's board of directors last year passed a new requirement that every member of NAR will have to do 2 hours of fair housing training every 3 years to be a member of this association. And Fairhaven is going to become our free online training that you can take that will satisfy that requirement. So we're updating it right now to make sure that it meets all the course objectives that the board of directors approved. The biggest change will be that we're going to add a history museum, and you're going to go and learn about some of the aspects of fair housing history that I spoke about today. We'll also be adding some new scenarios. So watch out for that. It'll be coming out in November 2024.
Oh, thank you. And speaking of that, a new change where we'll be required to do fair housing training, is that, I know that, of course, NAR wants to provide resources and Fairhaven will be one of those, but is NAR looking for states to also create our own courses that satisfy the guidelines? Is that something that
Absolutely.
Okay.
This is going to mirror the way the Code of Ethics requirement works. So we have a free one that we provide, but if a state or local wants to create their own, they can. It just has to meet the learning objectives set out by us.
Okay, so I'll be working on creating that, and I'll look to you for guidance. And another additional education piece is the bias override course, which actually has I took it, the video course, but now it has a new in-person format. So can you talk about that course and the new component to it?
Yes. So implicit bias is really important for everybody in real estate to understand because we all have it. It's the way our human brains work. It's a shortcut. It helps us make quick decisions. Sometimes that can be really helpful, but when the shortcuts are about people and they're based on stereotypes, you might be making a quick decision about somebody that's not really based on the truth. It's based on a stereotype, what you think that person is going to want or need because of their identity. So people can discriminate without knowing it because they're making assumptions about people and they're treating them differently. So we started out in 2021 with that hour-long video that was recorded during COVID. And it was time for an update, and we wanted to go deeper. That was always the intention. So we now have a CE course. It can be offered either 3 hours or 4 hours, whatever your real estate commission requires. And it can be done in person or on Zoom. And it takes a deeper dive into these concepts. It's more interactive. And the feedback that we've gotten is that, it really gets people thinking. It really gets people questioning their stereotypes, their assumptions. And we also, very importantly, provide tools about how you can stop yourself from doing that stereotypical thinking so that you can see each person as an individual and treat them like the individual that they are.
Yes, I'm excited to get the opportunity to take that. And you mentioned tools. Another tool that I've had a chance to talk to you about is the self-testing program, which I'm really interested in that. So can you tell us about NAR's self-testing for brokerages and how that works and people may be nervous to basically say, I want you to come see if my agents are doing right by fair housing, but are there any kind of protections that, against basically, do they get reported? What's going on with that?
I went from nodding to shaking. So, self-testing is a service that we are providing to a broker who wants to see, are my agents complying with fair housing law? And the way it works is that we have partnered with an experienced testing organization that has done testing for banks and the like. We pair the broker up with that organization. They test the broker's agents. Now, before they move forward, they sign a contract. The results are confidential, and there will be no enforcement action taking place as a result of the testing. And in fact, doing the testing, if you ever were to be accused of discrimination in the future, can be a defense. It can show that you were taking this self-compliance tool to try to improve what your agents are doing. So you have the testing, you receive the confidential report, and then you receive the follow-up training. Right now, it's still kind of in pilot where we're testing our second and third brokers. No, that's not right. We finished our second broker, and now we're testing our third and fourth broker right now. And the way to get involved is to reach out to me.
And this wouldn't be something an association did. This would actually be our brokerages under our association.
That's right. We're not here to be the cops. This is a service that we're offering to a broker if a broker wants to see how their agents are doing and to raise the bar for themselves. But it's all done by the broker.
Would the agents have like an advance notice that this was going to be happening, or is it kind of trying to simulate real life as much as possible?
So there's two different models. One model is that you tell the agents ahead of time and even give them training. And there's another model where you don't. And so the broker can decide how they want to do it. I've seen it done both ways. I'll tell you that even when you tell the agents and give them the training, they still don't get a perfect score.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I'll be reaching out just to get more information about that to see if any of our brokerages will be interested. So we've talked about a lot, but are there any additional resources where if a realtor wanted to get more educated about fair housing or DEI topics that you could refer them to?
Well, I would say go to our webpage, nar.realtor/fair housing. We're constantly generating new content. I was just looking on it to see what was there, and our new snapshot of race and home buying is on there. We have our Fair Housing Month toolkit on there. Oh, now I forgot to mention, we did a video series based on bias override. It's a 3-part, 5-minute video series that you could use in office meetings or the like. We just won an award for that, so that's on our website. We just posted an article on the 50th anniversary of the striking down of restrictive covenants by the Supreme Court. So go to nar.realtor/fair housing and you'll see the latest and greatest fair housing news from us.
Thank you. And my final question, how do you see the real estate industry evolving in terms of fair housing, and how is NAR going to be a part of that change?
Well, we've done a 180. I mean, in the 1960s, we were leading the charge against the Fair Housing Act. And if you go visit our archives, you can see the forced housing kit. That's what we called it, forced housing, that was developed. It's with a New York advertising firm. It's very sophisticated, that we sent out all over the country to help our associations fight against fair housing laws. So that's where we were. Where we are today is that we want to be industry leaders on fair housing. And, it's not just because it's the right thing to do or the ethical thing to do, but it makes good business sense. When qualified people are shut out of homeownership because of discrimination, it's not only them and their families who suffer. The local economy suffers. That's wealth generating activity that's not happening. The health of the community suffers. The fabric of the community suffers when people are forced to keep being renters when they could actually be homeowners. So we all benefit. And then, of course, in a couple of decades, the majority of new first-time buyers are going to be people of color. That's the demographic reality in America. So, we need to be forward-looking. We need to acknowledge our history. We need to see the challenges that people face and confront them head on. And we're fully committed to that. We're going to be a leader in this space, and we want to partner with anyone who wants to advance homeownership for all.
Thank you, and thank you so much for your time and for providing these valuable resources. And please check out everything we've mentioned, from the bias override course to fair having to the self-testing for brokerage, the realtor.com website. We also have fair housing grants that are available to you as local associations, DEI grants. It's a lot of resources out there, and this is a great time to be in this space because it's more information than we've ever had before, and we have the data to also prove these things and to kind of see where to go from there. So as always, I love partnering with you and just working with you and getting to know firsthand what NAR is doing in terms of fair housing. So thank you so much for sharing this with our membership today.
It is my pleasure, and I look forward to continuing our partnership.
Yes, so remember to tune in every Monday in April, where we'll be bringing you different experts just like Alexia here, and we'll put some information in the description for you to go check out. And as always, this is another weekly update. I hope to see you guys next week.